Hi everyone. So today we'll have some quick troubleshooting tips for how to do your My Scenes and your network render troubleshooting. So the first step, when you load up Deadline Monitor, you might see a default screen like this. And so one of the things you can do is over here in the corner, you can do a job batch grouping. You can turn that off if you want. That gives you a sort of breakdown of everything that's currently rendering. And currently we have these jobs going here. If you want to see completed jobs, you can go over here and you go to clear filter and you'll be able to see all the different jobs. So as you're rendering, whether you're monitoring an existing render that's doing its work now, or you are trying to find, like, you've got a render and you're like trying to discover like what happened to that render, you can click on the individual job and you'll get an interface here inside the tasks, right? So now from here, you can actually go and right click on a frame and you can actually export that output and go straight to that frame here. And it'll open up a Explorer window and then you can take a look inside the file and you can kind of see what it is that you've been rendering. So when you're troubleshooting a scene, there's a couple of things you can do. So for example, let me go down the list and try to find a scene that had a bunch of errors on it. So say for this job here, you right click it and you go to view job reports. From there, you just search through the list, right? And in this case, you can do by report date, you can do report type, you can do by worker name, whatever. Report type is usually the easiest because it'll show you stack them for the type of error, whether it's error completed, requeued, whatever. So in this case, we'll try error. When you look at it, it'll give you a summary. And in this case, the error is simple. Basically, we have a task timeout set, and it failed it at 2 minutes because it didn't complete the work in 2 minutes. These jobs are having difficulties with my batch. And this is a setting that we enabled for his job. And it failed it all because the scene wasn't loading. And so you can see that the error log tells you that's why I quit. Right there. Worker did not complete the task before the regular task timeout limit of 2 minutes. So let's try this one. Let's go view job reports. And let's see what this one says. Okay, so this one has a fail render exception. This one was an actual failure, right? So let's see why my batch didn't work. Now this error here is not going to be terribly useful. As you can see, strict error checking on, caught the following error, blah, 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 whatever, right? So in this case, you're going to go all the way to the bottom of the log file and then work your way up from when it died. Right? And so this is all, warning, encountered an error, etc. Right? And you kind of work your way up. And you can look at to see like what's happening. And this basically, it looks like the scene just didn't load up. So that on this computer, so let's say it was on this WRender 41 or 216.26. For whatever reason, this scene didn't actually load. It crashed. It couldn't process the file when it was ready to go. And in cases like this takes a little bit more detective work. You just basically let me know what's happening. So we're going to go down to the bottom and let's see what this one says. And so here's all this error checking stuff here, and it tells me here, there's our reason. Aborted by user, received abort signal. Now, why that? The user didn't stop this, right? Well, here, it found that, right? And so here's our first use case that Maya does allow you to have this thing called an optics denoiser. Don't use that because it only works on machines that have GPUs. And so it makes sense that this job failed on these computers because the WRender computers don't have a GPU because they're meant for CPU rendering only. Right? And so what this did was Arnold was probably set to abort on error. That's what it says here, error, right? So it hit that, and then Arnold said, all right, stop, quit, done. And that's it, and fit. Right? And so that's the reason for this failure, right? And to fix that, you would go back to your scene file, open up optics, and disable optics. So that was this error. So that was easy to troubleshoot. Right? And there's other variations. There's stuff like, I can't find the file, et cetera, right? So the log file is going to be your best place to go. Now, you can even use these log files to troubleshoot successful renders as well. So you just right-click your job and go view job reports on the successful job. You find and just pick a machine, doesn't matter, right? Like 216.26, right? So there's nothing wrong with this file, it worked, right? But maybe, sometimes a render takes a little longer. It's all to do with your settings, and your settings are what it needs to be. You can scroll through the scene up until it starts to render, right? And you can sort of go through the list, right? You can, you don't have to read all this line by line. Just go, you can drop all the way to the bottom and then scroll up from the bottom, and you will see that Arnold does a very nice job of tracking all your statistics, right? And so you can kind of go, you know, roughly find where it has where does it have where it starts to record these statistics. And you'll see, for example, like this part here where it says starting 16 bucket workers of size, that's actually the render. It's actually doing it, right? But then down here under ray counts and shader calls, this is where you can really diagnose your render times. And so what you'll do is you kind of, the numbers here will tell you how many ray counts per camera, per shadow, etc., are shooting, right? And the same thing over here is how many shader calls do you have? How many times is a sample hitting a shader saying, what is this shader? And, another sample, what is this shader? What is that shader, right? And the total percentage here will tell you what it's spending all its time doing. So in this case, for this render, it's spending most of its time doing reflections. It's not doing any time doing shadows. Shadows are happy. Camera, there's not a lot of AA on the camera, not a lot of AA for shadows, but for reflections, man, we are shooting a lot of rays here, right? And so this would tell you in this particular shot, you maybe want to tone down the reflections or figure out how to make them go faster. And then over here, shader calls. So there's a lot of shader happening here. There's a lot of stuff that's happening with the shader, a very detailed texture map, a lot of layers, right? A lot of stuff happening. So every time a sample hits one of the polygons on your object, it's doing this many shader calls. I don't know what this number is. What is that? How many is that? A billion? Right? So it's doing 2 billion shader calls, 21 billion, I think. So that's a lot of shader calls, right? And it's spending 59% of the time that it's rendering doing shader calls, right? So if that's what you need, if that gives you the result you have, that's what it is. But it gives you an idea of where this is happening. Right? And the same thing here for a light filter. You have a lot. This scene uses 36% of the time it's shooting through a light filter, which is again fine. It's just it helps you understand what is taking so long and enables you to say, okay, well, maybe I can't do anything about the shaders. I want that rich look, but maybe over here with my reflections, maybe I can say tone down the reflections or move my camera or maybe figure out something. Now down the list a bit on this, you can analyze all your textures and it gives you a list of every texture you're using, right? And it shows you how big it is and what the bit depth is, right? And, it's all right. But it does sort of give you a good accounting of what it is that you're doing, right? But then if you go down the list, occasionally you might find a broken. And so here we have paper box base color is broken. It's a TX. It's there, but it doesn't work. Now, you can use use this to identify anything that didn't appear. So if you have a render that worked and it says complete, but it's missing a texture, right? You can use this to see what was missing. So in this case, if you really did need this layer, roughness 1001 to 1004, you can see, oh, it's broken. Why is it broken? You have to find that out, right? But this is an option that you can try to use. And so you can kind of see that it basically makes a log file of everything. So here's a big spot of broken files here. So it's a brown normal, brown roughness. Did you need these? I don't know, right? But they are, Arnold is unable to load them. It doesn't necessarily mean that the file itself is a bad file. It simply means that this computer, 21626, could not load your file at render time. That's all it really means, right? But in so doing, the software says, well, I can't load it. That must mean it's broken, right? And so it records that, and it can help you in troubleshooting. In my demonstration here, I have made a scene that I put into Maya. So it's a very simple scene here. Just a cube and a sphere. So if I go to the perspective view, you can see no big deal. And on the morning render, it's very simple too. I did area light, and that's pretty much it. I submitted that to deadline, and you can see it's complete. And now, what you can do is, let's say it's complete, but it is something failed. Right? So in this case, for this demonstration, I took frames 2 and 3 and just moved them out of the directory, right? Because those are bad frames, right? Now, in this case, you could tell right away, you know, it's not there. But let's say you're viewing it in inside PD Player, and so you go to your Explore Output, right? And you go on your Test 2, and you're playing your, just go to PD Player, and you're playing it, right? And oh, you got some drop frames, right? So you go over here, you're like, oh, there's this red mark here, and those frames are gone. So what you can do is in Deadline, you can just tell it to re-render those 2 frames. So all you have to do is you go over to frames 2 and 3, even though it says complete, they didn't render for whatever reason. In my case, I moved them, but in your case, it didn't work, right? So even though Deadline says it did the work, it didn't. So you right-click the frames that were affected, and you go to BQ tasks, and that's it. And then what it'll do is it'll send those frames back into Maya to render on some node, and it will redo just those 2 frames. Now, another example is if you have a set of bad frames that are repeated, like it's always the same glitch. There's something wrong on this one frame. And let's go to PD Player and let's review. And oh, we're missing a bunch of frames now. It's flickering, right? So this is a common problem in network rendering, where you're going to get this kind of effect. And so, you know, realistically, what are you going to do about this, right? You're going to probably have to re-render these frames, but you have to kind of know which frames they are. So in this case, you can go down into PD Player, and you'll see, you know, when you can use your arrow keys to go through the sequence, and then when you kind of see down here, right, this is missing. Even though it says frame 7 here, ignore that completely. Don't worry about this frame number. Worry about that instead. That's your actual file name. 008 is missing. Okay, so you may go, oh, wait, write that down. Go through your sequence again, right? And oh, we've hit 22 is bad, right? And then over here 27 is bad. We've got a bunch, right? So you can write these frames down and note what they are, right? Now, in this case, it's very even, and you know, I've done forced this, right? But you might find that it's rather uneven and kind of randomized, right? One thing you could do is look at Deadline to see where those frames occurred. You find it in Deadline here, right? So there's frame 22. You do a control and you click 27, right? And look at that. They're starting to already form a pattern. 202.19, 202.19. Let's make a prediction. Here's another 202.19, right? Maybe we can sort by worker. Click on worker, and here's all the jobs done by 20219. And look, two are matching already. Let's see if 31 is missing in our PD player. Let's see, right? Let's go forward, and oh, 31 is missing too. How about this guy? Let's make another prediction here. Let's say that 36 will be missing, right? I'll make you bet it's missing, right? So here we go, and oh, 36 is missing. So we can assume that 20219, for whatever reason, failed all our frames. It gave us black frames, right? And so we can kind of see this is the distribution of 20219, that all these frames will be bad. But inside PD Player, it gives you this sort of randomized appearance. If the distribution is completely random, right? Like, for example, if you have bad frames that are on like all the machines, right? Then that isn't a pattern, right? It's if you reveal something like this that's straight through one or two machines that are consistently every single frame is bad off that machine, you know that that machine doesn't like your scene, right? If that machine did even one frame right, then maybe it's not that machine's fault. Okay. So what do you do in this situation? Well, easy. Once you've detected your pattern, you right click and you go requeue task. And look, it even has that as a feature built into Deadline because this is extremely common inside the industry. So, you might say it's our stuff. No, it happens to every single person who does CG rendering across the planet. It's so common, they put it in the Deadline as a default. So what you can do is you can just right click one of them and go requeue tasks by UCA20219 because that one computer messed up all these frames. So you click on that and you can even tell it, don't render to that machine anymore, blacklist it. Go to OK, it puts them back in the queue, and you render it on machines that aren't going to give you black frames. So that's a super useful feature for managing your renders.